Imagine one day during your commute, you find yourself in an unfamiliar passage. The area blends in perfectly with the rest of the subway. Tiled walls, buzzing lights, even the same corporate posters. But for some reason, you've never seen it here before. Shaking this off as just some recent renovation, you decide to make your way towards the nearest exit so you can better orient yourself. But as you move forward, something begins to feel wrong. Nothing loud or dramatic, just off. This corridor that you're in, it almost seems to be repeating itself. The shape of the path, the placement of the posters, even the same quiet businessman you've walked past again and again. At first, you figure you're imagining it. Maybe you're just tired. Maybe you somehow missed your exit and just got turned around, right? But the further you walk, the more undeniable the situation becomes. You're not making your regular commute anymore. You are definitely walking in a loop. The posters, the signs, the silence, everything is exactly as it has been time and time again. You even make a point to search for where you could have missed your turn, but you never find it. This impossibility rattles you, and somewhere in the back of your mind, dread begins to take hold. At this point, you turn around. Not because you're sure it's the right thing to do, but because your instincts are screaming for you to leave. And somehow, even then, you find yourself back in the corridor, back in the pattern. This is the basic premise of one of my all-time favorite horror games, Exit 8. A short, subtle, criminally underrated title, because unlike most horror games that rely on mascots or jump scares, Exit 8 belongs to a much rarer breed. One that doesn't chase you or scream in your face, but instead thrives on perception, on silence, on what you do or don't notice. These are games where fear doesn't come from a monster or an enemy, but instead where the environment itself becomes your antagonist. Someone or something is watching you, and not in a way that makes you feel hunted, but in a way that makes you feel like you've already been consumed. Exit 8 doesn't scream for your attention. It doesn't wave red flags for the most part. Instead, it chooses to hide things in plain sight. The eyes on a poster following you as you walk. The woman who shouldn't be standing there, but is. These small environmental subtleties have always been what unnerve me the most in games. The idea of walking past something terrifying and never even noticing it is horrifying. But when the environment itself becomes complicit in this, when it begins to morph around you and gaslight you, that, to me, is true horror. Not jump scares, not chases, but the moment a room shifts a few inches to the left and convinces you it never moved at all. Lately, I've been going through a very stressful period in my life, right? I've had trouble with my YouTube channel. My videos have been getting demonetized. And, that's not to mention like my actual real life stressors, like, my finances or, just the general state of the outside world. But, this isn't just a thing that I deal with, right? There are tons of people that feel their anxiety peak in the late springtime. And chances are you might too. Luckily, though, today's sponsor, BetterHelp, can help match you with a licensed therapist that can provide you support today. You see, the majority of BetterHelp members seek support for their anxiety, and 69% of those members reported improved symptoms after just 6 weeks of therapy on BetterHelp. And it's easy to start. Just fill out a quick questionnaire and you'll match up with a therapist in as little as a couple of days. And if you feel like that therapist isn't the right fit, you can easily switch therapists anytime at no extra cost. BetterHelp carefully makes sure that therapists on the platform are well qualified, and their customer support team is there if you ever have any questions. Let BetterHelp help you rule your anxiety so it doesn't rule you. Be sure to click the link down in the description below or go to betterhelp.com/IsacMorgan to get 10% off of your first month of therapy. And finally, an enormous thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring today's video. let's get back to it. Exit 8 is far from the only game tapping into this kind of fear, though. There's an entire subgenre of horror that's less about monsters and more about settings. Games that don't scream at you, but instead linger. They whisper something's wrong over and over again until you as the player can finally start to see it. One of the closest examples that comes to mind is PT, the short, playable trailer for a Silent Hill game that unfortunately never came to be. Like in Exit 8, PT also traps you in a repeating corridor, but instead of a bright subway tunnel, you're instead stuck in the narrow, claustrophobic hallway of a suburban home. The lighting here is dim. The walls are close together and feel like they're pressing in, and the more that you walk, the more uncomfortable that you'll start to feel here. I think this goes without saying, but PT's setting is significantly more unsettling than Exit 8's. A nearby radio drones on about how a man murdered his family here, his pregnant wife and his children, before taking his own life in the family's garage. And the house, now empty, almost seems to remember what happened. The portraits on the wall stare out at us, the faces of ghosts, and the further we walk, the deeper and deeper into this hell we'll go. The bathroom door begins to creak open on its own. A shadow flickers where no one should be, and eventually, after enough cycles, you'll find that you're not alone in that hallway anymore. Like in Exit 8, PT uses this repetition as a psychological tool. You're walking into the same room over and over and over again until something terrifying finally breaks that routine. It teaches you to pay attention and to fear your environment. Now, in all fairness, PT also has something that Exit 8 doesn't. Lisa. A ghost, a manifestation, a presence, whatever you want to call it, she is perhaps one of the scariest enemies ever put into a game. But if anything, she is a part of the environment. She's the embodiment of its violence, of its memory, of its rage. And that's what makes PT so effective to me, right? It doesn't just tell you that something terrible happened here, it makes you feel like the house remembers it. And now, so do you. Another interesting, albeit more on the nose example of this is the indie horror game Anatomy. Here you'll find yourself walking into an abandoned home, searching for different tapes lying throughout its halls. However, instead of your usual Slenderman-esque creature chasing you down, here you have nothing. The rooms of the house sit eerily still. There's no noise aside from the distant hum of a tape recorder. And then the tapes start playing. The narrator draws comparisons between the human body and the architecture of a home, saying, quote, "The living room is the heart, the hallways are the veins, the bedroom is the mind, dreaming." But the longer that you stay here, the less metaphorical all of this feels. You see, the house seems to shift when you're not looking. Doors will vanish, furniture will flicker in and out of the game, and the layout subtly seems to be rearranging itself. The audio on these tapes begins to distort too, becoming more garbled, more desperate, almost as if the house itself is trying to speak through it. And eventually, it does. The house tells us a story of a man, a stranger who entered the home one night and vandalized it. When he reached the basement stairs, the house reacted. It slammed the door shut behind him. And then it describes in unsettling detail how it could feel the man tumbling down its steps, how it felt his bones snap, how it ground him down into pieces, into paste, and then into nothing. And after hearing this story, you realize we're next. The walls feel closer now. It sounds more alive. The home begins to grow flesh and teeth, not figuratively, but literally. And in the end, it swallows you whole. It's not just scary, it's personal. Because what Anatomy captures so perfectly here is the idea that the space itself is alive. It doesn't just host the horror, it is the horror. this house remembers how it's been treated. It reacts and it retaliates. If I sat you down in front of anatomy with no context at all, chances are you'd spend the first few minutes scanning the shadows and waiting for a monster to pop up. But you'd never think to look at the rooms themselves, the hallways, the silence, the shifting architecture. You would never expect that you're already inside the belly of the beast. And to me, that's what's terrifying. Anatomy understands this and weaponizes that ignorance. Just like the man in the tape, we didn't respect the space that we walked into. We didn't know that it was capable of this. And now that space has decided that we don't belong anymore. Perhaps one of the most well-known examples of this sort of atmosphere, where the space itself is the source of dread, is the rising popularity of liminal spaces. These are places caught in transition, spaces that should feel familiar but don't. Like a school hallway at night, or a mall with all the lights on but no shoppers. You're not in any real danger in these places, nothing's happening, but somehow something feels wrong. In most liminal horror games, the environment doesn't need to transform or come alive to be scary. The dread comes from its silence. Its stillness, the wrongness of these places. A long time ago in a different video, I talked about how if you just removed NPCs from a normal game, you could instantly make it unsettling. I mean, let's practice, right? Picture your favorite game right now, your favorite place to roam around, but with absolutely no NPCs, no characters, no enemies, absolutely no life at all. In all likelihood, it would be just a bit creepy. Your brain would start to ask questions that the game isn't answering. And I think that's the key to what makes liminal horror so effective. You feel like you're too late or you're not supposed to be here. And when a game refuses to explain why, that tension just hangs in the air. I think that's a big part of why the environments from Silent Hill and Resident Evil come off as so horrifying. There should be people here. There should be lots of people here. But for some reason, there isn't. Silent Hill especially is just a masterclass of environmental horror. Because while it does have its monsters, the real terror is in the world itself. You walk through this familiar looking town until suddenly, without warning, it begins to rot. The streets peel away in the rusted metal. Chain link fences and bloodstains appear where brick and concrete once stood. It's not just a town anymore, it's a living purgatory. That's the kind of design that uses a setting to scare you, and unfortunately, a lot of horror games today seem to have moved away from that. Even games based on the backrooms, which started as this incredible concept of being stuck in an endless liminal space, often fall back on a more traditional kind of horror. They start off with the dank yellow hallways and flickering lights, but eventually it's just another chase sequence, another jump scare. Which is a real shame to me, right? Because the original terror of the backrooms wasn't a monster, it was the idea of being lost in this place that doesn't feel real. A space that watches you wander deeper and deeper with no intention of ever letting you out. But while some of the concepts of the backrooms may have failed, the same cannot be said for its oldest predecessor. House of Leaves is a journal about a dissertation about a documentary about a house, and it's quite possibly the most complex and horrifying piece of media that I've ever consumed. While the book itself shifts between a variety of characters and perspectives, at its core is a story about a house. The story follows photographer Will Navidson as he and his family settle into their new home in the Virginia countryside. And at first, it's everything that they could have ever asked for. Peaceful, remote, a chance to finally slow down and get away from the city. But throughout our time in the book, we'll watch as this dream slowly becomes a nightmare. Quote, in early June of 1990, the Navidsons flew to Seattle for a wedding, and when they returned, something in their house had changed. Though they had only been away for 4 days, the change was enormous. It was not, however, obvious though, like for instance a fire, a robbery, or an act of vandalism. Quite the contrary, the horror here was atypical. No one could deny that there had been an intrusion, but it was so odd no one knew how to respond. Upstairs in the master bedroom, we discover, along with Will and Karen, a plain white door with a glass knob. It does not, however, immediately open into the children's room, as it should. It instead opens into a space resembling a walk-in closet. However, unlike other closets in the house, this one lacks outlets, sockets, switches, shelves, a rod to hang things on, or even decorative molding. Instead, the walls here are perfectly smooth and almost pure black. Now, Navidson, bewildered by all of this, wonders if they'd somehow managed to overlook the closet when they first got the house. But at this point, they've been here for weeks. He and his wife have slept in this bedroom night after night after night. It was an impossibility for them not to notice it before. His wife, Karen, even finds a photo that the two had taken that shows that there was never a door there before. So the next morning, the Navidsons acquire blueprints. They contact their realtor. They even go as far as to call the police. But none of this gives them the answers that they're searching for. This room simply opened up out of nowhere. There's nothing that the police can really do about it. Quote, with all obvious options exhausted, Navidson returns to the building plans. At first, this seems pretty innocent until he gets out his measuring tape. Idly at first, he starts comparing the dimensions in the plans with those he personally takes, and very soon he realizes not everything adds up. Something, in fact, is very wrong. As it turns out, somehow the Navidson home measures 1/4 of an inch larger on the inside than it does on the outside, and this number starts to eat at him. At first, he assumes that it's just a case of bad math, so he measures again, but it's still there, so he measures again and again and again, and still that 1/4 inch anomaly persists. The more that the men investigate this strangeness, the more that it begins to grow. Eventually, a brand new door opens up downstairs into an unfamiliar hallway. This hallway eventually opening into a massive chamber, this chamber into a spiral staircase, and so on. The house, as the family knew it, was a mere facade for something much darker than any of them could comprehend. It had been sitting there the whole time, waiting, and it was only once they noticed it that it began to reveal its hand. And I think that's what makes House of Leaves so deeply unsettling to me, right? It's not about ghosts or demons or possessions. It's about space. It's about the betrayal of reality. It's about the fear that the ground beneath your feet, the walls around your bed, the space that you call home might not be what you think it is. There are countless other examples of this idea in action that I didn't mention today. myhouse.wad, for instance, feels like a direct descendant of House of Leaves. It borrows its shifting architecture to craft something deeply personal and devastating. And then there are titles like The Stanley Parable or The Beginner's Guide, which explore similar concepts, albeit in a much more lighthearted and comedic way. But even there, the environment isn't just scenery. It's a character, a storyteller. The truth is, environments are one of the most overlooked elements in game design. Too often, they're treated as just a backdrop, a static space for the player to exist within. But the most effective horror understands something deeper, that the space itself can be hostile. It can manipulate. It can deceive, and in the right hands, it can become the thing that you fear the most. Because what environmental horror shows us again and again is that the scariest monster doesn't always have to have a face. Sometimes it's a hallway that's just a little too long, a door that shouldn't be there, or a strangeness in your house that you can't quite identify. Before I go though, I just want to say that if you really like this style of content, please make sure to show this video some love. I'm always eager to do my sort of typical Ready or Not styled content, but I do love to cover stuff that's a bit outside of that box from time to time. So if you enjoyed this video and would like to see more of that sort of stuff, please consider subscribing to my channel and liking the video down below. It's free, it helps to support me, and it means the absolute world. But with all of that being said, thank you so much for taking the time to watch today's video. You know I love you. I'm out.